Welcome to the Training Ground Guru podcast in association with Genius Sports. In every episode, we bring you insights into the teams behind the teams in professional football. Coming up on today's episode.
Thomas Frankfurt, well, what's he like to work with?
He's such a top guy. Some from the outside will say, oh, well, he failed at Tottenham, so he's not a good coach. But I tell them they're lying.
I'm Simon Austin from Training Ground Guru, and our guest on this episode is Joe Newton. Joe was part of Thomas Frank's inner circle at both Brentford and Tottenham, and is part of a new breed of analyst. After starting off as a youth player at Tranmere and Wrexham, he got a degree and masters in performance analysis and secured a job at the New Saints in Wales. His big break came when he was appointed first-team analyst at Brentford, where he forged a close relationship with Frank and helped the Bees gain promotion to the Premier League. After that came a short and turbulent spell together at Tottenham last season, which ended in the sack in February. Joe told us about his progression in the game, about what makes Brentford special, why things went wrong at Tottenham, and about his special relationship with Frank. In this episode, we also have an interview with Adam Ridgewell, who worked for Southampton for 5 years before becoming account manager for Genius Sports. Adam told us how clubs like Brentford are using Genius Sports tracking data and Performance Studio to gain an edge in the game. We hope you enjoy this episode, and if you do, please give us a follow via your preferred podcast provider. Thanks very much for joining us on the podcast today, Joe.
Thanks very much for having me. Looking forward to it.
Whereabouts are you talking to us from today?
So I'm in Warrington at the moment. I'm back at my parents at the moment, which is, Warrington is where all my family are. So when I did move down to London, I was leaving all them behind, but literally all within a small radius of Warrington, all my family basically. So yeah, that's where I am today.
We'll come on to your time at Tottenham later, but what have you been doing since you left the club a few months ago?
Since I left, it's been quite nice, if I'm totally honest, in terms of a bit of freedom. Obviously not tied to a work schedule or a football schedule more specifically, which is intense and not much flexibility in that. So yeah, I've just been catching up with people who I like to catch up with regularly, but it's just been made easier that I can sort of work around them, with me being more flexible now. I've been on holiday. I'm quite a keen mountain biker, so I've been on a couple of mountain biking trips to North Wales and the Lake District, which has been nice to get away and something different. And then doing things like this and trying to stay in touch and contact with the game and people within the game, whether that be software providers or people like yourself. And just trying to keep in touch. And then obviously I won't go into too much, but I have been applying for jobs because I do need one again soon. So.
Is football very 24/7 when you're in it? Do you get much free time?
And obviously the season's going and fixtures are coming thick and fast. It's intense and you can go along the periods without any days off. Like depending on the fixed schedule, you could be in for like more than 14 days straight, for example. Obviously there is times within a season when you can get time off and it's more easy to do that, like international breaks. Obviously the off season speaks for itself. And obviously, if you go out of cup competitions, maybe you get a free weekend, and the coaches or the staff try and utilise that as a sort of refresh period and recover for not just players but staff as well. So it's difficult in that sense because it's hard to plan stuff really. It can come at short notice when those days off are going to come. So you don't tend to plan anything in the season, maybe more around international breaks, and then obviously, like I say, the off season in the summer. 9 times out of 10 in a European season, you're going to get June off pretty much. So you try and cram your holidays in June, basically.
I know you're very young still, but I think your career has been quite an interesting kind of case study in the evolution of analysis, really. So how did you get started in analysis and pro football in the first place?
So it seems crazy to go back to this, but my journey really in football probably starts when I was about 8 or 9 years old. I started off like everyone, I think, wanting to be a player. And I was fortunate enough to be at Tranmere Rovers Academy for 9 years. Like I say, started at 8 or 9 years old. went all the way through to get my scholarship. So 16 to 18, I was in full-time football as a scholar. And then obviously pro decisions came when I turned 18 or at the end of that scholarship. Didn't get a pro at Tranmere, and then I moved to Wrexham, where it's quite a unique sort of offer or scheme, if you want to call it that, where it was you were signed as a professional footballer at Wrexham, but you also had the opportunity to do a degree alongside that at Wrexham University. Glyndor it was formerly, but Wrexham Uni now. And I think that was the perfect balance for me and sort of transition, because I wasn't, arrogant enough to think I'm going to make it as a footballer. I could obviously, by the time the decision came at Tranmere, I knew I wasn't going to get a pro contract, but I still wanted to give it a good go at whatever level I could. And Wrexham was a good level at that point, the National League.
Who were they offering that degree course to? Because that's really interesting. I hadn't heard much about that.
It wasn't something that lasted a long time. I think we were, my age group kind of thing, were the first, and I think there was only one other after that, but it wasn't quite done in the same way. There was a lot more buy-in and excitement around it for the first year, which was my group. And again, I've sort of already been fortunate enough to just sort of land on that. And yeah, I'll compare it similar to like an American scholarship scheme, because I had opportunities when I came out of, or when I knew that my time at Tranmere was coming to an end, had like scholarship offers to go over to America. And it's crazy, because I think if there was someone else in my age group at Tranmere that wanted to do the same and we had a similar offer, I think we'd have gone together. Like a couple of lads in the year above us had done that. But ultimately, because it was just me, I was wanting to stay in this country, and then this opportunity with Wrexham came about. And it was led by Lee Jones, and obviously former player, and Adam Owen, who's like well known in the sports science industry. So they were sort of, alongside each other, running this scheme and introducing it to us. And obviously it's not far from me, it's not far from Tranmere. So I think as Tranmere, we played Wrexham quite a lot. So I think there was people at Wrexham that knew about me and the squad at Tranmere. And I remember Lee actually came in to sort of deliver or sort of sell it and say what it was going to be. And then obviously it was sort of an application process, and then I got an offer to join it, and then the rest is history, sort of thing.
Yeah, right. So you were still playing for Wrexham at the same time, were you, as you were doing the degree?
Yeah, so it was a unique thing, because like I say, there was almost like a full squad of us doing this sort of scheme. But we trained with the first team a lot, and the uni were good in terms of balancing and adapting the timetable so we could still train. But yeah, we were training training every day, and then usually uni in an afternoon or the other side of trainings. I didn't make a first team appearance for Wrexham, but like I say, I played a few reserve games and went on loan to a few different teams. One in the Welsh Prem, couple in the league below the Welsh Prem, and then some in the Evo Stick, it was called, and I don't know if it still is. With like Witton Albion and Colwyn Bay at the time, have now moved into the Welsh system, but they were in the English system at the time.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And so they would pay for your degree, would they, at the same time?
No, we had a student. I had a student loan at that point, so I'm still paying it off. But they paid us to, obviously, as part of the contract, to be a footballer, basically. So yeah.
Oh, right. Do you know of any other clubs that do that sort of thing? Because I don't think I'd really heard of that before.
No, I didn't. Not like I say, not over here. And obviously, it sounds very similar and is almost identical to a sort of a scholarship program over in America. But I don't know of any clubs doing it here. I think it was probably quite difficult looking back now for Wrexham as a whole to sort of deal with it, especially probably as the manager. Like, he's obviously got his first team squad. Wrexham still had a youth team, and then all of a sudden you get this sort of group, this squad sort of slotted in, and you're like, as a manager, you're probably thinking, where does this sort of slot in for me? Where can I use them? And so some of the lads did get opportunities. They made first team appearances, and like I say, we trained with them often enough to sort of try and make an impact and show ourselves. But I imagine it being quite quite interesting or difficult at times for the manager at that point. So I think now with teams naturally having a 21s or 23s, then it's probably a bit harder for that to slot in, which might be why it's not common, basically.
Yeah. At what age then did you decide you weren't going to play anymore and you were going to focus on being an analyst instead?
As I dwindled away from full-time football, so while I was at TNS, I was still playing, but semi-pro at that point. So one of the teams that I actually went on loan to in the league below the Welsh Prem, I was still playing for. And then, interestingly, the owner of TNS also had a team in the English system in like the lower non-league stuff. So I ended up, my contract sort of said, you're going to be TNS analyst when I'd finished my masters. You're going to be TNS analyst, but you're going to play for FC Oswestry Town as well. So I was like, all right, okay, no problem. So it ticked both. So it was only, obviously, like I say, I knew to a point that I wasn't probably going to make it in football, but I was still trying to, again, play at the sort of the highest level I could, while still obviously pursuing my career in analysis. And it was only when I moved down south for the Brentford job that I properly stopped playing. But up until that point, I was still playing semi-pro and stuff. So,
do you think playing to a decent level has helped your analysis?
I'd say so, yeah. I'm not saying I was a top player, so I know how it works, but I do think it gives a different angle when you've played at a decent level, which I would consider I did play at. I think it just gives a different angle of, what a player might be thinking, what you might understand a little bit more of what he's trying to do with the sort of technique he might be going for. I do think from that angle, it does help me. I feel like it helps me anyway.
Actually, I asked David Sumpter, the top data scientist, about that, and because people often see like an us and them, particularly with the data guys, that they're the non-footballers, like the geeks. But he said it does help you as a data scientist a lot if you play football, at least, to understand it a lot more.
Yeah, I can imagine that as well from a data point of view, because you want to understand that the data is showing or measuring what you actually want it to do. So if you understand exactly what you're looking for, basically, if you have that playing background, then it definitely would help.
And then how did the move to Brentford come about?
It was just obviously like a traditional job advert kind of thing, through my CV and then like I say, fortunately enough, got invited to produce a task, and then ultimately went down to present it to Luke Stopforth, the head of analysis at the time, and a couple of the coaches. And then a couple of weeks later, or a week or so later, got a job offer on the phone. So, and then it just went from there. Yeah.
What was that first job that you got there?
The title was first team analyst, which was basically what I was doing throughout my time at Brentford. Obviously, I just developed the role as much as I could and developed myself. But I think I've spoke about this before, that Luke and Brentford deserve a lot of credit for what I think was a very good interview process, because the task that I was asked to do was exactly like the job that I was going in for. So although like you might think TNS and then Brentford, it's a big jump, but confidence-wise, you'd sort of already done the job for the interview. So you thought, if I've been offered the job, and just got to replicate that basically, in when I get my feet under the table sort of thing, and keep producing those good meetings, hopefully. And that's exactly what it was. So I got a brief of, I think it was the Hull against Brentford in the Championship. Like, this was the opposition stuff. We focused on these areas. So could you debrief the game, focusing on these areas? But of course, if there's anything else that stands out, then feel free to talk about that. And then there was like a subtask, which was from the assistant manager, and that was like individual clips from Brian Reamer at the time. And again, that was exactly what I got into the role. So the bigger meeting debrief was team based and to the whole coaches and whole squad. But and then you had these little subtasks, ad hoc tasks with assistant managers or other coaches to clip up these individual clips. So it was, like I say, I think it deserves a lot of credit, because the interview process was almost identical to what I was going into, basically. So it was good.
And we've featured a few people from Brentford on the podcast and articles, and, I'm a big admirer of what they do, like a lot of people are. What's it like to be on the inside there, and how good are they at staff development?
I think it speaks for itself in terms of the staff turnover in a way. I think that probably points to the sort of direction that the staff go in when they get there in terms of development. I think it's a fantastic club. I've got nothing but good things to say about it. And I think it's just the key thing for me is that everyone is pointing and working in the same direction. That's the biggest thing. So you get in there and almost, I don't think you'll get anyone in Brentford who's like against the data, for example, because that's just the club. And yeah, I think I know that there's other departments and stuff, but obviously speaking from the analysis department, I think some of the progression of people that have gone on, like I'll just speak about set piece analysts, for example. I think I'm trying to work out in my head now, there's been, in my 6 years, I worked with 4 different set piece analysts. One moved on quite early on in my time there, just towards the end of my first championship season. And then we got in Jack Wilson, who then obviously he went on to Manchester City as set piece analyst, then set piece coach. He's now transitioned into, had roles at Wolves and now Sparta Prague. And then we got, as Jack's replacement, we got Mark Ortiz-Esteban in, who again, I think Mark probably speaks the most in terms of, obviously he deserves a lot of credit, but also Brentford as a whole, just the development of staff. He come in off the back of just an internship at Midtjylland. As a set piece intern, and yeah, obviously just developed himself. The club allowed that development, and then he's now set piece coach at New England Revolution in the MLS. And then obviously then we've got to replace him, and we got Billy right in from Norwich, and again he just hit the ground running. And I'd be, if you told me tomorrow that he's moved on to some amazing role, it wouldn't surprise me. But that being said, for anyone at Brentford, because they're a fantastic group of staff that the club allow to develop really well. So it's a fantastic group that can go on to be anything they want. Is my opinion.
And I know, as you say, a lot of bigger clubs, in inverted commas, end up taking these staff. But it seems to me it's actually like the culture at Brentford that makes it so effective. So just taking a member of staff doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the same.
No. And I think on a slightly probably bigger scale, obviously we took quite a few to Tottenham with us, but we found that, just because you take, say, 6-7 staff, whatever it was, that doesn't automatically take the culture from Brentford to Tottenham. And obviously we knew that, but it was evident when we got there. And yeah, I think it's probably what you call, Brentford's like secret sauce, I think, of why people from the outside think, they're punching above their weight every season. Because they'll lose players, they'll lose staff to these, like you say, bigger clubs. But they just managed to kick on again. And I think it's because it's the culture, the approach is all, like I said earlier, everyone pointing in the same direction and working in that same way. And that's from the very top. The owner's fantastic. The people below him in terms of Lee and Phil, just brilliant. So yeah, it's that culture that I think drives them, as well as obviously top talented people in staff and players.
People talk a lot about alignment, but it does seem you do really have that at Brentford, because obviously the owner really understands football, I think, understands data, has that good relationship with Phil Giles, and then it filters all the way down. Everyone understands, everyone's aligned.
Yeah, exactly that, yeah. Thomas spoke about it a lot when he was there in terms of the relationship he had with them. And yeah, like you just said there, it just filters all the way down. And Matthew is someone you'll see in the training ground quite often. He'll come into meetings. He came into mine once. I was like, oh my God. But he's just approachable. Like you could have lunch with him in the kitchen area. And yeah, he's just seems like a normal guy to talk to, but obviously very, very intelligent. And like you say, knows football and data extremely well. And that just, yeah, like you said, just filters all the way down through the club.
What was the meeting of yours that he came into?
It was after a cup game. I think we played Leyton Orient in the Carabao Cup, I think it was. So I was doing my debrief meeting for that, and he came in about halfway through it. I carried on presenting, and then we were going back to back because, like I say, the cup game must have been midweek, off from memory, and we were going back to back with Josh doing the opposition for the upcoming game at the weekend. And so I remember when Matt walked in, and I'm presenting, and I'm like freeze for probably a split second, and then just carry on. And then I look back to Josh, and he's just like you can just see the sort of colour come out of him a second for like a split second, like me, because he realised, oh no, I'm presenting next, and Matt's gonna be in here. So yeah, he came in for that debrief from me, and then Josh's opposition meeting, and again, literally the same day, we had lunch within me and Josh, and he sat down with us and said he really enjoyed the meetings and thought they were really good. So that's a positive.
What do you think he was trying to do, though? Was he trying to understand how different parts of the football operation work? Was he assessing you? What was that all about?
I've no idea. I hope it wasn't to assess me. I'd have felt under more pressure if I'd have thought it was that. But my feeling was probably just so he felt involved and understood the process that the sort of behind the scenes work. He'd more often came into Thomas's meetings with the players that obviously me or Josh would be behind the laptop presenting, and he'd be sat at the back and watch that. But this one was the first time I think I'd experienced it where he'd come into our like coaches analysis meetings as well. But yeah, I think it was more to just see the process of sort of discussions that we'd have in the meetings, basically.
I do wonder how many owners would understand like the ins and outs of what goes on within a football club, within their first team operation.
Yeah, that's what I meant earlier, when it was quite common sort of to see him at the training ground, whether that be out on the pitch watching training, whether it just be walking around having lunch, coming into meetings. But I think that shows how well he knows football and wants to know his football club and how we work, or worked at the time. And obviously it also comes from Thomas and probably Keith the same, based on what I know about Keith after working with him, that they welcome that. They don't mind him coming into those meetings. And that's another thing you say about owners. Some owners probably not being like that. Probably some managers thinking, oh, don't want the owner in here. Like, we could be saying all sorts of stuff that we don't want into here, but that just shows again the sort of alignment, the whole club, and how open the staff are of obviously just having discussions with everyone from the very top all the way to the sort of bottom of the staff. So yeah, it's a really good club.
And you would say it doesn't feel hierarchical there. You could feel like relaxed and that you have an input even as a junior member of staff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Obviously you acknowledge that he is the owner, or that is Phil Giles. But it's you don't feel like, oh my God, I can't talk to him. Obviously you're probably a bit more nervous speaking to him than say Josh, my head of analysis, who I was good mates with. But yeah, I think that just how open and good the club is with culture, that you can speak to people, you can email them, it's a fairly open sort of, you can have open conversations with people from the very top as well. What
was your progression like within the club? Can you just tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so like I say, my role and title was pretty much the same throughout my 6 years, but there was things that obviously personally I was always trying to develop, whether that be learning new skills like Tableau, for example. I remember sort of self-teaching myself that with YouTube videos, with Tableau forums and things. Data courses, I did a Google Analytics course, but I think the biggest progression probably came from the club side, was obviously riding the waves sort of getting promoted as well, because obviously then moving to the Premier League, it's different, get access to maybe different software providers, different platforms, different ways of capturing footage live, because Championship you'd have to film your own games, whereas Premier League you can use the Hawkeye footage, or broadcast footage that's distributed through the Hawkeye network. So that's again, like, you're sort of progressing yourself there by learning new ways of doing things at the high level. So although my role probably didn't necessarily progress, the club did, and then obviously things within that I was trying to add extra bits to in my role, whether that be an extra bit of training analysis, whether that be slightly different report, and then naturally with the different platforms that you then get access to in the Premier League, it then opens up different possibilities. We didn't have tracking data, for example, in the Championship at my time at Brentford, but then as soon as we moved to the Premier League, you can get access to that because it's a sort of league-wide deal kind of thing. And we then signed up with Genius not long into our time into the Premier League with the Performance Studio, and that just the merge of event data and tracking data just adds another layer of things that you can go into. So yeah, that progressed you in a way, or me in a way, to sort of learn these new platforms and new skills.
How did that change what you do, having the tracking data and also being able to use the Genius Performance Studio?
Yeah, so it again just adds another layer to things. So instead of just your sort of, I'll call it generic sort of metrics, it just adds another layer to it. Or if you were trying to, I'll give an example of say runs behind a defence when you're in possession. If I really wanted to know that in terms of from a post-match point of view, how many times we did it, the only way in the Championship, because of what we had access to, would be for me to manually tab that. And then obviously that would be limited to just our data, just our games, because we just wouldn't have the time to go through every Championship game. But and then the beauty of Genius and the Performance Studio is that the tracking data just does that for you. So, and then you can be obviously just be really specific with it. You can add extra filters to give extra context in terms of the minimum speed of the run, for example. So it's more like a sprint or an actual run rather than in just standing just behind the defenders. And then, that just adds, like I say, another layer that then, like I said, if you were doing that sort of manually in the Championship, you'd only have your data or a limited amount. It's just once you've got that sort of metric in the Performance Studio, you can run that across the league and see sort of where you're ranking against other teams. So it just adds that extra layer of things that you can measure that are relevant, because of course there's the generic metrics that you can use, but how much do they actually tell you? So as much more context with the tracking data that you sort of adds the question of how effective are we at something. So it opens up that door kind of thing.
And would Thomas Frank or even the players have a direct interest in some of that benchmarking and some of that data?
Thomas and the coaches definitely would. I felt like I could be a bit more, I don't think complex the right word, but maybe you could use more complicated or complex metrics with the coaches because they were more familiar with it. And then we can obviously adapt that to when or if we deliver it to the players, or be really clear in what that metric actually means, just to make it really clear for them. But yeah, the coaches were really open to that, and I think they welcomed the extra layer of things with the tracking data that we had available to us. And yeah, like I say, Thomas was really, really open, and he was keen to know what, once we sort of introduced into some of these metrics and these stats, that he was quite regularly saying, where are we for that? Or we'd be checking the opposition report where it would show like a league table in certain metrics. So he'd not only be looking at where the upcoming opposition are, but where we are in the league, not just compared to the upcoming opponent, but the rest of the league as well. And that's sort of, how he was with data.
For anyone who doesn't know very much about the role, and there will be quite a lot of people, especially among fans, I think, what would you do as a first team performance analyst, like day to day, week to week?
Yeah, so obviously it's probably start with a summary of, tends to be what, there's obviously splits into different roles, the first team analyst role. So I'll speak about our department at Brentford because that's the sort of topic we're on at the moment. So we had Josh Kirk, who's the head of analysis, but he'd focus on the opposition side. So he'd watch the opposition games, produce those meetings, and deliver that to the coaches around either Monday afternoon, say we're working off a Saturday to Saturday week here, Monday afternoon or Tuesday morning. So then that can be drip fed to the players in terms of training content and meeting content throughout the week leading up to that Saturday. And then there was me. He was focusing on the post-match stuff. And then we had a set piece analyst who focused on all set pieces, whether that be pre or post-match and live, of course. And then we had an assistant analyst who would do a lot of the data reports and league database and of goals and chances and things like that, and more ad hoc tasks if me and Josh were and Billy or Mark or Jack, whoever it was at the time, were more occupied with other things. So it just gave us that extra pair of hands. So now I'll talk about sort of my week. So again, working off a Saturday to Saturday, we'd work the game live, all three of us. So the set piece analyst, me and Josh. We'd deliver stuff at half time, of course, that would be either taken by ourselves that we thought was necessary to show at half time, but we'd also be radioed up to the bench. So if anything that the coaches wanted, whether that be Thomas, whether that be any of the assistants, they'd radio up and say, we need to show that. So then we'd take that. Then after the game, that's when my post-match process starts, really. I'd try and get it done on the Saturday evening. And then I actually had a day off on Sunday, but obviously I had the Sunday as a buffer. And that was often the case. I'd always do at least a couple of hours on the Sunday. And produce that meeting, debrief wise, and then that would be presented to the coaches Monday morning, first thing. That would then get trimmed sometimes quite quickly, if it was a quick turnaround, to then present to the players. And then Tuesday was, again, that's probably when Josh would present to at least the coaches. It wouldn't tend to be to the players at that point. So Tuesday was a sort of, I found Tuesday to be like the final day of debrief and just collating everything. So that might be little small unit meetings, defensive unit meetings, attacking unit meetings, individual meetings. So Thomas would often come to me and say, I need clips of this player doing this, this and this. Or if he'd had the time to go back through the game, he might give me timings and say, clip these up for me. And then I'd organise them in a way that I felt were best to present. And then we'd show them individually to players in meeting rooms and in the corridor, whatever it may be. And I felt like by the end of Tuesday, that was sort of the debrief side done. Then we'd usually be off Wednesday. And then Thursday, Friday was the tactical stuff of the pre-match and opposition meetings. And then my role then would be more, I'd make sure that all my post-match stuff was databased properly and backed up and all that stuff. Best practice sort of databases made or added to. And then I'd be assisting Josh wherever I could. I'd be on going out to watch the tactical 11v11 and getting those clips ready for if we wanted to show them in the afternoon or the next day. And then pre-match before the before the game on the Saturday, the final meeting would be a meeting. So the process would be that Josh and Thomas to the players would highlight, okay, this is what, example, Chelsea do. They do this, they do this, they do this. Then the match day meeting would be examples of previous games of us, not necessarily against Chelsea, but against other teams that play in a similar way to Chelsea and say, right, we said that they do this and this is what we're going to do to them. And it's that sort of positive reinforcement that you've done this before, which just sort of images in their heads of this is what we need to do again kind of thing. And that could be from previous games. It could be from training that week. And then that's the final touch point really before the players then go to the stadium. And then the last touch point is obviously when the team comes in and we talk about the individual players and what their obviously key threats are, if probably just reinforcing what's already been mentioned in the week. And that's sort of what a week would look like for me, really.
Well, that's a brilliant insight. Thank you.
No problem.
And I can remember there was a video of you, I think, delivering analysis to the players with Thomas Frank there, and that kind of went viral, I remember, and people loved it, and it was when Brentford were flying high. So you became quite well known, I think. People started to learn who you were at that time. Yeah,
that was strange, because all of backroom staff, but analysts as well, well, they're usually behind the camera. They're not in front of it. And they're, going behind the scenes and no one really knows what's going on. And that's how I probably prefer to be honest. But, this sort of documentary or this piece, I think it was Sky Sports. They did a day in the life of Thomas Frank, I think it was called. They came in. I was aware they were coming in, but I didn't think they'd be in our meeting.
Sure.
So the normal process was I'd be in early on a Monday to just finalise my meeting, make sure everything was working well and stuff in the meeting rooms and all that. And Thomas and the coaches and the medical staff would have their meeting first, and then Thomas would basically come down the corridor into our office and say, "Right, we're ready for you," kind of thing. And then that's when I'd go in to present my debrief. And like I said, I knew the Sky Sports cameras were in, but I didn't know they'd be in the meeting. So I walk into the meeting room and there's like 3 cameras in there. I'm like, what is going on in here? I think I definitely look more nervous than I probably would be on a normal meeting. But aside from that, the process and that is what you see in that video is pretty much identical to what we do on a daily. I had mates message me saying, "Is that what you actually do? Like every week?" I was like, "Yeah, like there was nothing sort of on show for the cameras, specifically changed just to show us off, kind of thing. That was the process." So I present then to the coaches and the other analysts, and then I think later on in the video you see me and Thomas sat in Thomas's office, and we're then finalising, creating that sort of narrative and that story that we want the meeting to the players to show. So that could be a case of taking clips out, reordering clips to sort of paint that story, paint that picture the best way we can. That I think it was quite good obviously quite good for me. I felt like it was good because it got some, like you say, good sort of feedback. But I think it was good for people on the outside to understand sort of the process in that. And like I say, that Monday morning can get hectic because we'd present, say I'd go into the coaches at 8:15, 8:30, with discussions and everything. We could be in there an hour. And then obviously Thomas and me want to get some cut bite of breakfast. Often I'd miss breakfast because Thomas would just get a bowl of fruit or something. He'd be sat in his meeting room, sat in his office with me, and we'd be trimming down the meeting because time was tight. And then we'd be presenting to the players at like 10:15, something like that. So it was often that process that you see in that video of me and Thomas sat in his office trimming that down, that meeting down. That can be, that can be busy at times and quite intense to because you're under time pressure basically to deliver to the players at a certain time. So, but yeah, like I say, the documentary or the piece was quite eye opening, I think, for a few people. So it was good.
I can remember that you got a lot of praise for that from the fans. They seemed to love it, what you were doing, the insight they were getting as well.
That's
and
good.
Thomas did as well. But it kind of reminds you of that thing. I think Marcelo Bielsa said, I'm a genius. What did he say? Something like, the things that make me a genius when I win are the same things that make me an idiot when I lose. So Thomas Frank's probably doing the same things at Tottenham, but then they're being interpreted in a different way because of the results.
Exactly that. Yeah, like you say, it's fans understandably are very results orientated, of course. So you could have the best performance of your season and lose by a fluky old 2-1, but you'd go on to Twitter, you'd go on to Instagram, and it's terrible performance. How can we lose to them? But then you could scrape a 1-0 win against a poor team, and you've played really poorly. But the fans are like, oh, great win, we've got to find a way to win. But performance-wise, it's probably the worst of the season. But that's just the way football often works, especially with fans. And understandably, of course, there's results-based business. But in terms of building something like longer-term performances are just as, or if not more important.
With the move to Tottenham, which was about a year ago now, and Thomas Frank always said he would take you with him to another club, or was that a surprise when that happened?
He'd sort of half mentioned it. He not saying he'd had opportunities before this, but we'd be in a meeting and I'd do something, and he'd go, "Oh, Joe, this is why you can never leave me, or I can never leave you," kind of thing. So So that done sort of small hints. I was like, okay. And then, yeah, obviously, like you say, about a year ago now, the call came saying that he'd been offered the opportunity at Tottenham and that he wanted to take me with him. And yeah, I think I wouldn't say it's a no-brainer because, like I say, I've got nothing but good things to say about Brentford and I knew how much of a good thing I had there. But it was a fairly easy decision because of the situation I was in at Brentford. I'd been there a number of years and my role had pretty much stayed the same aside from me trying to develop it as much as I could. Josh, obviously fantastic analyst, fantastic guy, was making no sort of indications that he was moving on, which is fine. And that would have been my next logical step at the club, I'd like to think, in terms of at least wanting to or applying for the head role if it came up. But in my head, that had no like soon time of coming kind of thing. So, and then obviously just the opportunity itself on its own, regardless of all that, going to Tottenham with Thomas, with the others, like Chris and Justin from Brentford. It was too good to turn down, basically.
And your title changed to coach analyst when you went to Tottenham. Did the role change as well from what you've been doing at Brentford?
Yes and no. In terms of, it didn't change in terms of I was still doing the post-match for Thomas and the coaches for every game. So that main bulk of my work stayed the same. In terms of day-to-day, I'd say yes, it did change. I was based with the coaches. I was in coaches' meetings. I was on the grass for every session, basically, aside from maybe when it was a smaller group stuff after a game, I'd focus on spending time in the office and getting some work done, whether that be individual clips or databasing of chances or anything like that. But yeah, the main bulk of my work stayed the same. But then day to day, in terms of being in them coaches' meetings, being that contact with the coaches and that link between coaches and analysts, that was the biggest difference.
Right, so that hadn't been the case at Brentford as much, that link between analysts and coaches?
No, and it was always something that we sort of discussed in the analysis office, and I'd also mentioned to Thomas that Thomas and the coaches would have these meetings, and there wouldn't be sort of any analyst in there to sort of hear what they were talking about, think about what they were talking about, to then maybe an ad hoc task to go away and say, you know, that you was talking about yesterday, I've actually got some data, or I've got these clips to actually support that. And that was something that I felt we could have done at Brentford. And ultimately that's what I ended up becoming at Tottenham for Thomas and the other coaches.
It's a role that we have started to see more and more, actually. There's more and more examples of it. Like I think Aaron Briggs, who was at City, then Liverpool, Adam Sadler, who was at Leicester. Quite a few examples, yeah. So there has been that merge between analysis and coaching, you think, more and more?
Yeah, and I think, like, I'm talking about my role now, that people think, oh, coach analyst, I actually coached. I didn't, but that was just the way my role was. So mine was more of a link between the two. I'd probably define mine as being like the eyes and ears of the coaches. So anything I saw or they were seeing, I could then relay back to the relevant people in the analysis department, or whether I just did it myself, kind of thing. Or these things that were discussed in meetings, I'd have my laptop there and I could sometimes find it straight away. Sometimes it was a bit more of a bigger project that I had needed to go away with, or, like I say, liaise with the relevant people in the analysis department, whether that be data guys, whether that be opposition analysts, whether that be set piece analyst, and go from there. But like you say, it's becoming a more and more common title. But the title might, in terms of the role, might be slightly different. Could be, if you come from more of a coaching background, you might be doing more on the grass than I did, for example, in terms of actual coaching. You might be setting up the opposition team and taking up that role of almost like a coach. Like we had Kev O'Connor, for example, used to do it at Brentford and work with Josh and say, right, in this phase, Arsenal are like this, and Kev would be responsible for setting up that other team in training. That could be the role of a coach analyst going forward. Because if they've done the analysis, as an example, or work really closely with the analysts. They know it from back to front. They can just go and implement the team and put it out there. So yeah, I think it will depend on the sort of background and how you sort of got into that role of what it looks like. But that's how it looked like for me, and that's how I could see it for others as well. But yeah, it's becoming more and more common, basically.
Did Tottenham feel like it's the biggest scale when you went in and more focus, more pressure?
I think in general it would have been like that anyway. Obviously, just size of club, massive, and of course there was that. But even personally, like obviously my name had been mentioned in terms of going with Thomas, so that got a bit of publicity, if you want to call it that. So, I mean, when it was happening that I was going to Tottenham, my phone was just blowing up. It was crazy. I've never experienced anything like it. So that was completely different for me personally. But even say if I'd gone a bit more under the radar and no one knew my name, I think the size of the club would have still stood out compared to Brentford. But I think, like I say, because my name was being mentioned, it just added another layer to that sort of publicity and that sort of, yeah, people noticing me kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, but it was at the time, of course, when it was initially happening, it was exciting. It was good. And then, like I say, started the season quite well. And then obviously it became more difficult, that sort of scrutiny, if you want to call it that.
Reflecting on it now, yeah, where do you think it went wrong? Because as you say, you brought in about 7 staff, same people, you're working in the same way, but the results aren't the same, and suddenly the pressure builds.
These are going to sound like excuses, but it's the reality of it, I think. Of course, like, we weren't perfect. There's things that we will look back on now and say, oh, maybe we could have done that, maybe we could have done this. But I think that's with hindsight. I think the way we worked and the way Thomas works, we had so many meetings daily, coaches and me included in that, to discuss what training would look like, what the team might look like. And we're getting all this information from medical, from all the coaches, their thoughts. And I'm convinced that there wouldn't be many decisions, obviously, again, taking hindsight out of it. I don't think there'd be many decisions that we'd come to that we'd think we'd come to differently if we were put in the same situation again, because we were making them decisions with what we felt was a good process, with all the information that we needed to make the decision. And from the outside, that might look, why the hell have you done that? That's a crazy decision. But internally, with the information we had, like, okay, he's struggling with this, he can't play more than 50 minutes, whatever it may be, that are just crazy examples. But when you know that obviously influences your decision. And because of that information, because of that process, I think put us back in that scenario again, I think it'd be rare for us to come to a different decision. So I think in that case, we wouldn't do things differently. But of course, like I say, in hindsight, there's things like, oh, maybe we shouldn't have done that. And we're not perfect. I'm not saying that. And I think I said to you before coming on this call that if you look at, I think for any manager going in or any group of staff, they need time to implement things, to obviously understand the players, what works for players, different group of players, completely different group compared to what we had at Brentford. And that takes time. And I think early on when we had a pre-season, even with it being not disrupted, but pre-season tours and stuff can be crazy. We were in Hong Kong, South Korea. They're intense, the little training time, and all these sort of hurdles you have to overcome. But even with that, with the Super Cup final, and then the early part of the Premier League season was quite spread out in terms of how it got to when you throw Champions League games in there as well. I felt we were actually onto something. And I mean, the results and performances, I think, speak for itself. In the early part of the season, we started quite well. And then ultimately it ends up catching up with you. When those Champions League games come in, of course, you get injuries. You know you have to rotate the squad, whether you like it or not, because then you're going to get more injuries. So it was rare, I think, that we'd play the same 11 back-to-back games because of that situation. And then that's then harder for the players. It's harder for you because players can't then build relationships because you've got to swap that player. And that's just the reality of it. And I think, ultimately that ended up catching up with us with injuries, with, just burnout, if you want to call it that, and just being able to reproduce performance levels. Like we'd have some really good performances, really good games, and then we'd come to the Tuesday game or the following Saturday game after a good game in the Champions League, because we did well in the Champions League. We'd come to the game after the Champions League and you could just see that we just couldn't get going. And I'm speaking like as if the players, that's also the staff. Like, I'd be up till God knows what time on a Tuesday or Wednesday debriefing the Champions League games, 4 a.m. in the next day. It eventually catches up with you when you're doing that. However many times we had to do it in the season with cup games as well as Champions League, it ends up catching up with you. And that is ultimately what I would say happened. You lose that time to implement ideas, to train, to understand the players and what works for them from a training point of view and just like scheduling point of view as well. So all of them things I'd say sort of contribute to what happened basically.
Does it feel a little bit like you need a break or you need a breath when you're in the middle of it? Yeah, you've always got a game, weekend, midweek, weekend. So you're constantly on that cycle and you can't breathe through.
Exactly that, yeah. Like I say, it just ends up catching up with you. It's just a ball that keeps rolling kind of thing. And I can't remember exactly, but I remember we got to like January, I think it was. And we had a free week. And when I say a free week, I mean like a weekend to a weekend. So we had no midweek game. And I'm sure it was something like that was the first time since August that we'd had that. And that's like, of course you got to play games. Of course you have. But when you're a new group of staff, learning a new group of players, that if you just had 2 or 3 more of them in a season, I do think it'd make the world a difference. And then even like there was obviously a patch of games when things weren't looking great. But I think internally that there was a feel that we were onto something, we were getting somewhere, and like the games weren't like, we weren't getting battered. I know we got beat by Arsenal quite convincingly, but that was just a real bad day, bad performance. But we went through a spell where we might have lost a few games, but they were like by 1 goal, and it's just that feeling that, of course, like you always need a little bit of luck sometimes, and if just some of them games just went your way slightly. I remember one, like for example, Bournemouth away. I felt especially second half, we played a real good game. And second half, my opinion was there was only one team that was going to win that game. But the footballing gods, if you want to call them that, just had to write a story that it was Semenyo's last game before literally going to his medical for Man City the next day. 94th minute, he had to score the winner to make it 3-2. And it's just those things that you just like, at that point, you're just like, oh my God, everything's going against us. But of course, there's things within that you can affect, but there is a feeling like, I'm convinced that if just a couple of games went differently, whether that be instead of losing, we got a point, or instead of drawing, we got 3 points. A couple of them turning more in our favour like that, I think it's a completely different story. But that's the fine margins, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. Did the style of play change between Brentford and Tottenham?
No. I mean, ideally it wouldn't have. I think there was probably moments where we thought we can't do that here, or of course, like it could be dependent on personnel or capability of a player. Like throughout a good chunk of the time we were there, we had Destiny Udogie injured. So even, let's say, playing Jed Spence left back, that just one example just throws a little spanner in because he's right-footed. So that can limit how you build up maybe, or your options within building up. So yeah, we tried to And that's the thing that when I said about time, that you need time to get, whether that be meetings, whether that be training, to get sort of principles, ideas, style of play across. And I think because of the number of games, we didn't really have that. And it was hard to get those things across. And that's where I think it probably worked in pre-season, because we more of the focus towards obviously the Super Cup, we were playing PSG, that we basically got the defensive stuff nailed, or we tried to get it nailed. That was our sort of focus in pre-season. And I think in the early games you can see that that we were good defensively. And then as the season went on, we were trying to drip feed in the attacking points. But yeah, obviously, like I say, the time was limited, and trying to think of ways to do it when training time's limited, whether that be through video, through small individual meetings, and then of course games. But then sometimes that's too late with doing it in a game. So.
Thomas Frank, first of all, what's he like to work with, and what will he go on to do you think? Because he's just come out and said he won't take a job this summer. Yeah, I know his stock's taken a bit of a battering at Tottenham, but it was very high when he was at Brentford.
Firstly, to answer the first part of the question, he's such a top guy. Obviously a top coach, even though some from the outside will say, oh, well, he failed at Tottenham, so he's not a good coach, but I tell them they're lying. He's done a number of years at Brentford, and we achieved some amazing things considering the club. And that was obviously down to him in terms of what he built culture-wise at Brentford is still living on now, I think. And obviously Keith has added to that in his own way. And I think he has and will thank Thomas for what he did in terms of building that culture. And Thomas takes a lot of credit for that. And that is the type of person Thomas is. He's just a good guy. Really good to work with. Obviously, like you'd imagine in high-end sport, it can be demanding at times. I'll get phone calls at certain times of the day. I'll get voice notes. I'll get messages. Can you look into this? Can you look into that? And of course, that's just the way it is. That's what being an analyst is sometimes, or just working in football in general. He's a very open person. So, like I said, or mentioned earlier, with all these coaches meetings, he would welcome other people saying what they think. And I think that makes him so good, because he's not arrogant enough to say, oh, my way is the only way. Like he's welcome, and he might not take that advice. He might not take that view, but he'll listen to it. He's open enough to listen to it. And I think he said, like you just said there, he said he's not going in the summer. He doesn't feel it's the right time, but I think that openness also shows in the statement where he said, I want to go away to other sports, to other organisations, and see what I can learn and study, basically, and come back a better version of himself, kind of thing. And I think, again, that just sort of sums him up as a person. He's always looking to develop, and I think that's where that sort of openness comes from, because he wants to learn. And that's why I just enjoyed working with him so much, because although I would say I'm just an analyst, I felt comfortable enough to say what I thought. And sometimes, of course, Thomas would go, Joe, I don't agree. Sometimes he would. But I'd rather feel comfortable in saying stuff and then him disagreeing with it than me not feeling comfortable to say it at all. Yeah. And yeah, like I say, that's just him as a person.
Brilliant. And finally, what do you think the future could hold for you? What are your ambitions?
It's an interesting one, because of course I'm between things at the moment. Hopefully stay in analysis, of course, and at the highest level that I can, and whatever opportunity comes in hopefully the next few months. And yeah, just keep working, keep developing myself. I think longer term, I know you've had guys speaking at the conference and stuff that have done this course, the Sporting Director course. I think that's something that further down the line I'd love to sort of go into, and I think I'm gonna look into doing that course and seeing what that could sort of look like. But yeah, that's me really. I want to go back to not being under the radar, but just getting on with my job as an analyst again, and getting in. I've had the time now where I've been able to sort of debrief things in my head and make a few notes and things. And now I'm ready to get back in, basically, into a club.
Thanks for mentioning the conference, because I'd forgot to mention that you're going to be presenting at our conference day 2, September the 30th at Old Trafford, Manchester. Yep. So, really looking forward to that. And
me too.
Yeah, we need to talk in a bit more detail about what you're going to be presenting, but it's going to be quite a bit around that coach analyst role.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we need to speak about that, but I'm looking forward to it, and I'm excited.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, well, thanks so much for your time today, Joe.
Thanks, Simon. Thank you very much.
Everyone is looking for a new edge. To find it, you need fresh perspectives. Our sponsor, Genius Sports, uses advanced AI, unique mesh tracking data, and tactical video to help analysts and coaches see and understand the game from every possible angle. This includes player POVs from the 3D recreation tool that sits within their performance studio, already being used by top clubs in the Premier League, Ligue 1, Pro League, and more. Genius pairs football's most extensive tracking dataset ever with multiple automatically synced video angles for the fastest, smartest insights. Join the world's top clubs and find your new edge today. Learn more at www.geniussports.com/TGG.
Thank you very much for joining us on the podcast, Adam.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. It's always nice to chat about things, football, software, and talk with you guys.
Genius, the sponsors of this podcast, enabling us to do it. And also Joe was talking there about how he'd used Genius at Brentford, which we'll get onto more. But I wanted just to start with if you could tell us a bit about your background in football. So before you came to the company.
Yeah, of course. So I've been with Genius for just over 2.5 years now. But prior to that, I was an analyst for 15 years or so. And I worked various different levels, various different sports as well. So I started at Birmingham City with their 18s, just in one of those sort of classic internship placement roles that you start with. And then I did various different bits at Bristol Rovers. I worked with a women's basketball team. I then actually started to work for Hawkeye on cricket, which was more to TV, but the analysis on that as well as the DRS, decision review stuff, which opened up my eyes to software a bit more as well, rather than just actually working as an analyst. But I knew I wanted to work in football. And I then got back into football, working at MK Dons in their academy. Then I moved on to Doncaster Rovers, first team analyst. And then finally ended up at Southampton in the first team there for nearly 6 years. So various different levels, different age groups, worked in all 4 league divisions. Also worked for the FA for a bit doing international football. So I've covered quite a few different parts of the analysis journey in different roles.
We do see quite a few people move from clubs to companies to providers. What was that a difficult decision for you, and what was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one where when I started, the sort of what does a 30 or 40-year-old analyst look like was an interesting question, because the industry was still quite young, and maybe even like roles like coach analyst didn't really exist at that point. You were just an analyst, and typically they were sort of 20-year-old people. As my career developed, I started to think like, what would the next step be? Ultimately my goals changed as my career went on, but the goal was to be a first team analyst in the Premier League roughly. And I achieved that, which was incredible. But then I started to think, right, if I want to have a family, do I want to be working every weekend? You get 4 weekends off a year. Like, is that really what I want to do? And I think you do start to see people now who come out of football saying, they want to focus on family. Well, I kind of didn't want to get to that bit. I wanted to be present a bit earlier. And I sort of thought about I could go into recruitment. Coach analyst role wasn't really what I wanted to get into. I didn't have probably the charisma to become a coach, I don't think. But I was always into software, and part of my roles were to test software, speak with companies and work with them, both to help them improve their software, but also ensure we picked the right software for what we needed to achieve. So that interest was there. And I had a couple of interviews at different companies or stuff, but I was fortunate enough that at Southampton, we used Performance Studio and Junior Sports for like 4 years. Really enjoyed the conversations I had with the team at Genius. And when a job came up there, I think we were a very natural fit for each other. So yeah, it's a different way to go, but I really enjoy it because I enjoy talking to teams about workflows as well. And this enables me to do that.
And what's your role at Genius?
I'm an account manager and I mainly work with the Premier League and Championship teams. So we're a bit different where we're also a data provider as well as a software provider. So there's two aspects to that where we provide them data on the behalf of both the EFL and Premier League and the FDC. So we work to smooth those transitions. And then if teams have friendlies or European competitions, we can obviously help them with the data for those games as well. So that's one part of it. Then the other side is using our software. And we're very fortunate that we work with nearly all the Premier League. In the Championship, the teams actually get access to some of the software included in that EFL deal, which is great. But then we also work with other teams and nations around the world, which is really good. It varies the job quite a lot, which is great. And I also find that, you have those different conversations and it keeps me in football a little bit to sort of tick that box for me personally, which is great.
Joe was telling us about how he'd used Genius at Brentford, which was very interesting. So first of all, he was saying about when they were promoted to the Premier League, they were then able to access the tracking data that came from maybe Second Spectrum, but to start with, then Genius. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about that and how clubs use that tracking data.
When they got promoted to the Premier League, we didn't work in the Championship at that time. So that would have been why they suddenly had access to the tracking data.
Do you work in the Championship now then? Sorry
yes,
to cut in.
So we've been in the Championship for 3 years. So we're going into our 4th year next season in the Championship, whereas we're going into our 8th year in the Premier League. So there's sort of different pathways there. And teams have had access to tracking data. There was a previous tracking data provider to us in the Premier League, but obviously as teams get more experience with it, they can do more things with it. And also the data becomes better, richer and capable of doing more things as well. So we're then able to help them with that, both on what you can do with that raw data off their own backs, with the data departments that these teams have has improved greatly as well. So whilst the majority of my time is spent talking to analysts, like video analysts, I would say, obviously we also talk to data analysts and sports scientists who all have slightly different use cases, whether that be with the raw data or actually what they want from software. So that's really interesting. And then also developments have come on. So you've got things like skeletal data now, so a step up. If you think of this, it's 3 tiers of data really. So you've got center of mass, which is 1 point on your body. So that's going to give you your XY coordinates, where are you on the pitch. Then you'll have skeletal data, which is about 20 points on the body. That can power things like ProView 3D in the platform. Or maybe you can work with a company like Wrexham, who again take our data on behalf of the Premier League to produce different things. And then you have the tier up from that, which is called mesh data, and that powers things like semi-automated offsides, which we do for the Premier League. So you've got those different tiers of data and they've all got different use cases.
Clubs are able to do much more in-depth and rich analysis then with tracking data than they would be able to do with event data.
Yeah, exactly that. So your event data will tell you X, Y coordinates where stuff is on the pitch, but then of just the actions that happen, if player A passes to players B, you'll know where they were. With the tracking data, you then know where everybody else is when that pass happened. So things like off-ball runs, pressures, locations between the lines become more powerful. And also you can start to do what I would call things that didn't happen. So maybe your centre-back has the ball and a teammate was available between the lines, but didn't get the pass. You can find those moments as well, which obviously can become really useful. On top of that as well, with traditional, say, GPS data, you might only have access to your team's data. With the tracking data provided by the league, you have access to everyone else's data in the league. So you can do things like benchmarking, do we run this much compared to other teams in the league, and those sort of things, which become a lot more powerful for teams.
Is there more sharing of tracking data between leagues now? So if you're looking at a player in a foreign league, would you get that depth of data?
Yeah, that's where there's probably different tiers to data. So with us providing the official data for the league, the data belongs to the league and we help them produce that. Whereas when you're looking to compare across competitions, you're going to need to go to an unofficial data provider, if you like, still high quality, like a broadcast tracking company, for example, who can actually go and take the broadcast footage from these leagues and produce data across those leagues. Now, I'm sure for their own admissions, and teams will know this, that data, if you were to take our tracking data as like the gold standard, maybe, they'd then be sort of 90% of that, or around that sort of ballpark maybe. So teams then have to decide, do you want quality, quantity, and those trade-offs. Eventually, as more leagues work with tracking companies, I think leagues will sign deals between themselves to provide that data to each other, and it will become the highest tier of data will be shared more widely.
Joe was talking about how Brentford had used Performance Studio, and I think they use the whole suite of Genius products, don't they, at the club?
Yes, yeah. We're fortunate, as I say, we work with most of the Premier League, nearly all, in fact. And our software has a few different sections. And Brentford are one of the teams that do actually take every section of the software so they can get access to the full thing. For context, we would describe our platform as having 4 sections, I guess. So we have Insight, which is multi-game. So you can search for, I say we've got 7 seasons of Premier League data. So if you think of like YouTube, you could search for a specific video, but you can go obviously search for a specific video of a specific moment, and you can layer the tracking data. So you do really simple stuff like, I want to see all of Erling Haaland's shots, but you could also be really specific and say, I want to see all of Erling Haaland's shots during a transition. I want that transition to have to start in this area of the pitch. I want Kevin De Bruyne to play a pass at some point in that transition from this area of the pitch, to find those more complex stuff. And you can imagine there's a whole world of other stuff you can do as well. We then have a section called Creator, where you can automate some of your workflows. So let's say you watch 5 opposition games for your pre-match analysis. Well, if you know what you typically code or clip, you can use our software to produce an XML so that you don't have to do that. And maybe you can then just focus on adding more intricate bits. Or, as like myself did at Southampton, we created an XML and we put it in all 380 Premier League games, save that onto a server, and then at any moment, any member of staff at Southampton could take that game off the server and know that it would be coded like a first team analyst at Southampton would in our philosophy. So you can do things like that, which are really powerful.
What is the XML, just to explain?
If you think about a video, any sort of video, a movie or anything, you'd got a timeline bar at the bottom that you could scrub through. In most software packages, you'll have something beneath that, which would be called the timeline. So actually there'd be a bunch of different rows. So one row might be possessions, a second row might be shots, a third row might be passes. So those moments can be clipped up in what would be called an XML, and that XML allows you to transfer that data across different software platforms or data analysis tools. And that can be as simple or complex as you want it to be.
Fantastic.
And then the third section is our fitness section, essentially, where we take all that tracking data and we provide it in an aggregated form, which means you haven't just got to deal with the raw data. You can immediately find things like accelerations and decelerations or high speed running. And you can get that on a player basis, a team basis, on a whole season basis, on a per game basis. And you can break it down into things like intervals. So show me how much we ran from 0 to 15, 15 to 30, those sort of things. But also, because we've got all the tactical information as well, you can interweave that over it. So for example, you'd be able to find out things like show me who does the most sprints during attacking transitions specifically, which are some of the questions you do get from coaches. They might say, I don't think we sprint enough when we win the ball. But with the software, you can actually find those things up, which is great. The final sort of area of the platform we've got is called Spotlight, which is our newest section. And that's where you get into sort of data visualizations. So teams will be able to pick what metrics they want, and display these in different widgets, either just a list of numbers or, a nice sort of spider plot or a timeline graph, as well as producing average shapes and formations and things like that. So that's where teams can really start to turn that data into nice sort of visualizations to build their sort of opposition dossiers for pre-match work or a post-match report, depending on what they're trying to achieve.
Some people might have seen the 3D performance analysis as well, which was really interesting. So where does that fit within the 4 pillars that you were talking about there?
Within these different pillars, there's different sections. So, for example, in Insight, there's a video clip section. There's also a ranking section where anything you want to search for, you can then get the data on that as well, and not just a video. So you could provide context. So, for example, if you know that Mo Salah does 100 1v1s this season, is that a lot compared to the rest of the league? You go into the ranking section, you could then see how many he does per 90, for example, compared to other people, which is really useful. And wherever video is on our platform, we have different options. So we stack the different camera views we have. So in the Premier League, they're really lucky to have at least 5. So they have tactical, broadcast, they have 2 18 yards and at least 1 high behind. So different camera angles, which is really good. We also have a 2D animator where you essentially see all the players just as dots running around. But you can add things on top of there like pitch control or Voronoi, to give it a technical term, or you can get their player trails. You can see where they've come from or where they're going to go to and that sort of stuff. Really useful for set pieces. And then our newest option there is a 3D world, which then allows the analyst to go wherever they want. So yes, they've got those 5 angles. Obviously, some of the leagues we work with, they might only have 1 angle. But with this 3D world, you've got the skeletal tracking. So you actually get a 3D representation of each player, and you can go into all sorts of views. So you can pick your own view, but we've got like a drone style camera that will follow the play up and down. So a lot of these teams will use drones when they film their training session, so they can replicate that. You could go behind the goal, which is great for goalkeeper analysis. And of course, you can go on board with different players. So quite often you might get, as an analyst, a player say, well, when they're watching their tactical video back, well, that's not what I saw. That doesn't reflect. You can't just pause that video and tell me that pass was on. But with this 3D world, you can actually go and see what they could see at the moment. And that can work both ways. Sometimes you can be like, yeah, no, that pass was on. We do want you to play that pass. And other times you'll be like, oh, I'm sorry, that pass wasn't on. You're right. Or you could actually even prevent yourself from saying something to a player and creating that debate, which is really useful.
You're very experienced in the industry now. So I was just wondering about how you had seen analysis evolve. So I'm thinking in terms of the staffing at clubs, the number of staff they have, the impact that it has within the football operation, and also the technology. So how those 3 different bits have evolved in your time.
Yeah, massively. I mean, when I started, we were still giving DVDs to a guy on a motorbike and then take it off and get it processed somewhere else, and then you'd get your data back maybe a day, 2 days later. You know, sort of, we were still living in those sort of times when I started. And, you know, you might be like recording stuff off the TV with a sort of DVD recorder and transferring it into sort of thing. So yeah, it was very manual in those days. There weren't any sort of league-wide shares, so you'd have to be emailing people and be like, oh, can you send me this game footage and all those sort of things. Whereas now everything's set up, and also most teams might have only had 1 or 2 analysts, whereas now departments have several people and those roles are specialised. So you've got things like set piece analysts, training analysts, those sort of things. So the whole scope of it in terms of the scale of it has really changed. I think also things like probably even like the level of respect that analyst gets has changed a lot, where now you can have coach analysts who go on the grass, sit on the bench and those sort of things. Which are really powerful. And you get managers taking analysts as staff, as like key members of staff, because they often know the best way to display philosophy and things like that in videos. So that's really important. And then, yeah, in terms of the software, yeah, that's massively changed. You know, it used to be a lot of manual coding, whereas, yeah, as companies have embraced richer data sets, but also AI to do some of the work for you, that allows you to specialize and save time. And rather than doing a lot of manual coding, you're actually then able to interrogate the footage and data and provide better insight, I would say.
That's fantastic. Yeah, well, thanks so much for your time today, Adam. That's really interesting.
No problem. Yeah, it's been really, really great to chat.
Thank you for listening to the Training Ground Guru podcast in association with Genius Sports. We'll be back next month with another episode.